Autumn and spring are the best times to completely revamp a border, and after about 10 years of wedging plants in here and there, I've realised that my border really needs to be completely renovated. So I'm going to take you through those steps in case you're thinking of the same thing. It's Alexandra here from the Middlesized Garden YouTube channel and blog, and I'll be drawing on the advice of some of the wonderful gardening experts, head gardeners and garden designers I've interviewed over the past few years. So I'll link to the videos with more tips from them and any other resources I mention in the description below. And if you're new here, the Middlesized Garden uploads weekly with tips, ideas and inspiration for your garden. So if you'd like to see the videos when you open up YouTube, tap subscribe. The reason why autumn or spring are the best times to renovate a garden is that obviously in winter the ground is very cold, but even if you don't have very cold winters, it's a bad time to plant because it can be very wet and the plants are dormant and they will probably rot. And in summer, even if you're planting plants that would normally deal with your summers well, any extra hot or dry weather can just make it really difficult for them to establish, even if you water them. And another reason why autumn is a particularly good time to renovate a border is that actually the plants can be much cheaper. I've been looking online and going out shopping, and I've seen some amazing bargains, and more than 50% off in some cases. And if you're going to renovate a border, that can mean buying quite a lot of plants, so it's worth thinking about that. You can't, of course, plant all perennials in autumn. You may have to keep some of them over winter in pots, perhaps in a greenhouse or a potting shed or close to the house and just protected from the cold. The first tip comes from garden designer Beedle, who I've interviewed about winter pots, winter containers, window boxes, and also about drought-resistant plants. And she's a former garden designer and has often had to renovate borders for clients. And she said one of the most important things is to clear the border completely. And I was slightly alarmed about this and said, well, I've got trees and shrubs and roses. And she said, no, if you've got established trees, shrubs and roses and you want to keep them there, leave them in, because obviously they've got quite a deep root system. But everything else, even if you want it planted in the border again, dig it up. And I was muttering about echinops and salvias and things like that. She said, no, dig them up because you really do need a clean slate in order to replan the border. The second piece of advice comes from garden designer Posy Gentles, who I interviewed recently on a low maintenance garden. And she said that if you're going to renovate your border and dig up all your plants, it's a really good opportunity to pick through the soil and get out all the roots of perennial weeds, such as ground elder and bindweed. While you'll never be able to pick every root out, you will reduce the amount of roots quite considerably. And when the weeds come back in the spring, you'll find it much easier to get on top of them. The third piece of advice comes from absolutely everyone, which is that when you're renovating a border, make sure you add a good mulch, something like garden compost or well-rotted manure. I just put it as a layer on top. I don't personally dig it in because I'm no dig. And I let the worms and the microorganisms do that for me. But it will really give your border a good nutritional boost, and of course it's much easier to get it over the whole border when the border's relatively empty. All this, of course, means that renovating a border takes a certain amount of time, effort and money, and I don't say that to put you off, but just because it's a good idea to get this idea of preparation in your head. It's like those instructions for painting a room. All the DIY books used to say, 9/10 of the work is in the preparation, and I used to think, oh, I'm sure it won't matter, and then I'd just slap the paint on and it would look terrible. 9/10 of the work really in planning the border is preparation. So when you've dug up your plants, you can do 4 things with them. You can either pot them up and keep them and then replant them in the border, possibly in a different place later on. You can replant them somewhere else in the garden, and I've got a border that does very badly, and I've taken to just thinking, well, I'm just going to put loads of things in there, anything I don't want in the main border, and just see what does well. You could give away plants to friends, or you could put them on the compost heap, painful as that might be. Now it's important to measure the border just so that you know how many plants you might be thinking of buying, and also to think of a theme. It could be a colour theme. For example, we have red brick walls here in this garden, and there's also a red stroke purple Catinus grace, which is a big feature in the border and which I want to keep. So I'm going to do a colour theme around reds, purples, blues and with orange splashes. And I want it to be quite vibrant. But if your style of garden is, for example, English country, you'd want a classic herbaceous border. Or if you'd like cottage garden style, you'll be thinking of a cottage garden border. but it really does help to narrow down your choices of plant if you have a colour or style in mind. Which takes me on to, it's very important to research the plants before you set out buying. And this is another piece of advice from everyone I've ever interviewed. If you just go to a garden centre or a nursery and you buy the plants that look good at the time, you'll finish up with a garden that only looks good at the time you went shopping. And also the labelling doesn't necessarily have enough information on it for you to make the right choices for your garden. If you shop at an independent nursery, a local grower of plants, they are fantastically good at giving you advice and you'll be able to talk to them about it, so I'd warmly recommend that. And if you go to a large garden centre, there is more information on the labels, but it does seem quite generic. I went recently and every single perennial in the whole place had a label which said, plant into moist, fertile soil and water well until established. So it didn't give me any idea of which plants would be the most drought tolerant or the most resilient in extremes of weather. There are so many things to think about when you're choosing a plant. The first thing to check is to make sure that the plants are suitable for whether it's a sunny border, a shaded border or a partially shaded border. And also you'll need to check how they survive winter in your climate. There's the height of the plant, there's the spread of it, there's how long it flowers for, the colour of its flowers, the colour and interest in its foliage, whether it's wildlife friendly, whether it's got winter interest. So I found myself writing this down on a grid, and this was really helpful because I wrote in sort of 5 different plants, and under winter interest I was writing no, 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 no. And I thought, right, I've really got to research some plants that will give winter interest to this border. You could do this on an Excel spreadsheet, or I've put together a beautiful borders planning checklist, which you can download free from my Middlesized Garden blog. And don't forget to include any other factors, such as if you've got a windy garden or a very exposed garden, or you tend to have droughts in your area. The next tip comes from Tom Brown, who I interviewed for 12 tips for a stunning border. And he's head gardener at West Dean Gardens and a garden writer himself. And he said, buy fewer varieties of plants, but more of each variety. And I once interviewed him when he was renovating a border and he'd got an original list of 80 different kinds of plants and he reduced that to 25. And the reason for having bigger groups and fewer varieties of plants, one is that you'll get a really good splash of colour. If you just put 1s or 2s or 3s of plants in borders, then you'll only get tiny little bits of colour. And also, Tom says that a border is a very competitive place, and the more aggressive plants can outcompete the slightly more tender plants. And if you've only got 1, 2 or 3 of a particular kind of plant in there, and 1 or 2 of them just simply get overwhelmed by their neighbours, then obviously you've got nothing left. Whereas if you've got a clump of 5 or 7 or 9, then you actually, if 2 or 3 have gone, you've still got a good clump. Repetition is incredibly important in a border, he says, so repeat the same plant or the same groups of plants or the same colours of plants in different places, and it really pulls the border together. And next, of course, if you've bought your plants and you're ready to plant them, how far apart do you plant them? Well, the thing to do is you have to know their spread, and every label should have the height and spread on it, but in fact in many plants, as in this one here, it's only got the height, so that's another reason for doing the research. I've done the research on this gaura and it'll grow to 50 centimetre spread, which means that's the amount of space it'll take up in the border. So it needs to be planted 50 centimetres apart from the next plant. But many people actually think you can take that in by about 10%, so plant 45 centimetres, say 16 or 17 inches apart. And there are others who would actually plant most of their perennials about 12 inches apart. So really, in a way, it's up to you to experiment. If you do plant them closer, then when they grow and they mature, you may have to take a couple of them out, but that's not a problem. And if you want a closely knit look right from the start, well, give it a go. I'll keep you up to date with the progress of the border over the next year. If you'd like more advice from the experts I'd mentioned, there are some wonderful videos on creating beautiful borders, and I've put it into a beautiful borders playlist, which is at the end of this video. And let me know what you do when you revamp your borders. And thank you for watching. Goodbye.